As we said in the first video, the car started life as a damaged Ferrari 328 GTS. Everything was stripped back to the bare chassis, and at that point we evaluated what needed to be changed to get the chassis to F40 spec. Around the same time I'd managed to source a complete set of genuine F40 suspension, so the plan was to modify the chassis to exact F40 spec so that the suspension could be bolted on and used, and the car would hopefully replicate the vehicle dynamics of the original F40 as close as possible. When Ferrari created the 288 GTO back in 1984, they started with a 308 chassis and lengthened it by 4 inches. This is because the engine is mounted transversely in the 308, but was switched to a longitudinal arrangement in the 288 GTO and later the F40. On the 308, the gearbox was mounted underneath and just behind the engine as part of the sump. This made the powertrain sit quite high and didn't leave much room for turbos and intercoolers. By switching the engine through 90 degrees in the 288 GTO and using an all-new transaxle, which now sits further back behind the engine, this allows the centre of gravity to be much lower and creates a lot more space for the turbo system and the intercoolers. This is what pushes the rear differential back 4 inches and requires the wheelbase to be lengthened. So when converting from the 328 chassis that we started with to F40 spec, the rear section of the chassis needed significant work. The engine mounts are totally new, the rear suspension pickup points are 4 inches further back in relation to the rear bulkhead, and the various brackets and mounting points for the transmission, turbo system, intercoolers and so on are totally different to the original 328. Since we was actually using a 360 engine as well in this case, it's also quite different from an F40, so a lot of these things needed to be fabricated specifically for this powertrain option. As well as the changes to the rear of the chassis, there are also a number of tweaks to the front part as well, mainly in relation to the F40 suspension geometry being different to that of the 328. The suspension pickup points and shock absorber mounting points are in different places, so again this all needed to be fabricated from scratch to F40 spec. The roll cage is another area that was added for this build. A 328 GTS didn't have a roll cage, and obviously this is an essential part of the F40 structure and helps to add stiffness and strength to the overall chassis.
Other than the doors, the roof and the nose, it was like this. There was nothing to it. In fact, the pedals being on is a bonus because they weren't on either. The platform was, which I've chopped and changed to make it right hand drive. Yeah, Ferrari tube as they call it, or as it's known. It's not entirely as was. I mean, you can still see it's original and quite old because it's an old pitted piece of steel now. It's been restored as best it can before it's come to me. The roll cage obviously wasn't standard, and that's to be finished. Which is sort of what kicks off what I've got to do, because in order to fit the floor, and the footbox, we have these side pods which go over the roll cage. So to do the floor and ensure it encapsulates, it's you as an occupant, I've got to get these side pods in, but to get the side pods in I've got to get the roll cage done. And to finish the roll cage off, I've got the rear end hinges off here, a piece off here. So I've got to get that on, but to get that on I've got to get the rear arms done. And I've also got to stand the back end on to make this hinge piece, and if I've got to stand the back end on, I've got to stand it on the back bumper. So to start doing the floor, I've got to put the back bumper on. Logic. And I've done the classic, put the spanner down that I had 10 seconds ago, and now I don't know where it is.
It's not a 10 mil, is it?
It's a 13, which is like the second in command of disappearing for no reason. And Brett's got a fantastic library of pictures how it's put together. And that's all I've got to go off to show what's been done. There's a bit of guesswork for me before I can move on to what I know I need to do, which will be the floor beams, tidying up these surrounds that hold the aluminium panels, and then in the centre where is an access panel for the engine, and this diagonal V which forms the bulkhead in which that could attach. And then we move back into finishing this rear roll cage off, which mounts here. I've got no reference to make that happen other than F40 images and the parts and pieces we have got. This was made because F40s have the front frame on an F40's bolt on. This is original. That's where the VIN number's stamped. It's still stamped. Now I know these were altered, the pickups for the suspension roll, because obviously the F40 has a different layout. But they were all so basic and so simple back then that they were all relatively similar as well at the same time. Ferrari definitely didn't TIG weld back then, so I can't imagine that these are original F40 parts. That's new. This has actually been cut out and flipped and put back in, and then TIGged, ground flush and primed again to make it the right hand drive that it is, because it fits well with where the column needs to go and how the dash sits, because the dash has got sort of pockets and dips here and there, so it can't just be a straight piece. That's why it's a bit like zigzag. Yeah, all of the cage is new. I can tell just from the laser writing on the side there, it was Performance Metals. This is an original piece of frame, so where it's all pinch welded together. Yeah. Obviously I can't spot weld, pinch weld, whatever you want to call it. This is all sort of spot welded, because this is an original piece of frame. This is like an additional piece to tie in, and this is an original piece that goes over for the screen, which is now taken up by the roof panel instead, so it doesn't need to be completely across. Mm-hmm. This is all new. This is blended. I don't know if you can see it with the camera or anything like that, but you can see how off-centre that really is. Mm. So you can see how off-centre centre tube is, because they're left-hand drive, you can see how much of a difference that makes. I think it was only sort of a 55 millimetre difference, but it makes a huge difference to the amount of space you actually have for a driver and driver controls. So I've got 55 mil, so 2 inches for my American friends. Less space to fit the same 3 pedals that they did have on the left-hand side. And we also don't get the same natural footrest, because the clutch would obviously be on the left-hand side. A piece of the frame sort of steps away, and that becomes a natural footrest. In here, we're not going to have that. So that's another thing I've got to try and get to work in there, so he hasn't got to rest his foot on the clutch pedal the whole time.
Does it also create an issue for the actual manual box, or...?
No, so the box itself, obviously we're using a 360 box, so we have got, and that's cable operated. All we'll do is the shifter and the cables will still route to the left hand side of the tube, and because of the difference in where you sit, it actually is no different reach wise for the shifter regardless of what side you sat. So the shifter will still mount on the left hand side of the tube in the original location, and it'll feel no different even though you sat on the opposite side of the car. I've just got to make the F40 shifter mount, the shifter unit from the F40 work with the 360 cables, which is not too difficult. But yeah, so this is all new. This is all different. Strut tops, this framework, the suspension mounts here, they're all different. All this was built upon the original oval tubing that did exist. This is new too as well, to accept the fuel tanks that the F40 takes. The whole car is wider, so you've got more room to do these things. Yeah, in fairness, it was done from drawings and images. It's not like you've got templates or jigs or anything to build this from. You've got, here's the F40 hub and the control arms. This is where it's meant to be in 3D space. You know, it's difficult enough just lining those panels up onto the back of the car and getting everything lined up. I've had to make it so that the panels went on in the first place. I know that's a complex task from building the others. You build the chassis to a point, and then you get the body onto a point, and then marrying the two so it's all in sync and in line. That's where the challenge is. Otherwise you can end up with a car that drives perfectly straight, but the body's not quite on right, and it looks like it's going diagonally down the road. And I mean, the tolerance is to ensure that the car looks and is square to itself are huge, because a millimetre down here multiplied by the 4.5 metres long this car is, or thereabouts, That's a big difference. So you've got to be accurate. Untreated surfaces, you know, just from the workshop being damp, they're not great. So all these untreated surfaces, I mean, some of these will just go, and some, because this is exactly what we want and we don't want to alter it, I'll just spend the time cleaning all that up. Front to back, top to bottom, bringing it all back to being immaculate. If I can't get it clean enough, I will cut it out and make it again, because it needs to be immaculate. Get it all nicely primed, weld through primer, and then just try and work as quickly as possible so we get all these pieces together and defeat the inevitable rust that tries to ruin your nice clean chassis. The faster you can get things cleaned up, primed and protected, the better chances it stands of never actually having to deal with anything rust related. Once good clean up, here, there and everywhere. If it can't be cleaned, make fresh, and then get it all covered in primer to make sure it doesn't bloody happen again. I've took them out because it was too difficult to clean up all the inside gaps with them in anyway, and they just weren't neat. I'd rather redo them so they were neat. And this panel that would have been formed by that is engine access on the originals.
Right.
So we're trying to obviously retain that. We don't need as much engine access because our engine sits a bit further back. It's a bit more accessible from the back, but it's in keeping with the original. It's kind of handy to have more engine access than not, so. And the jig's not going to be bothered about a bit of extra paint, is it? Need a Sharpie that works, that one. Okay, see where she goes. Does that look right up there? That's good. We're not replicating an F40 here, but we kind of are, in a sense. It's just a modern day F40, so we still want features to look like the original. So we're going to go with an oil tank mount that looks just like the F40 had. I'm just going to line this up roughly where it needs to be so that the filler is in the correct place when you look through the infamous rear polycarbonate screen, and then I'll jump on to designing them out. I'm going to follow where this spar has been welded in here up to my mark, 160 on the dot. That's nice and easy, isn't it? That takes me into the base of the can. I want to come to the waist sleeve. 60. No. It's over here, you donut. Measure twice, cut once. In my case, measure 3 times. Get a different ruler, measure it again. 120 mil. Okay, that's easy enough, isn't it? So I've got 130 mil of width, probably going to go, make it a nice round 100. 100 by 120. Alright, basic rectangle. Mark the centre, and if I use this as a representative of where the bush sits, because they are as wide as this socket, just draw around that to give me an idea. What I should have done is mark this with an extra bit of material on the side, so represent the flaps too, but I haven't, so we'll deal with it. I'm going to grab a hole saw. I think a 50 mil hole is the perfect size, so roughly there. Works for me. Now, if metal was as easy to work with as card is, cards would take no time at all to build. But unfortunately, they do take time. Go see how it looks in the car. So if I go from the centre there to there, that gives me a good 65. Centre to centre to centre to centre. Chuck her on there. Apply duct tape. Grab can. Here's only a rough estimation of if I'm in the right place or not. But that looks like that's going to work a treat. So we'll go with that. We'll churn that out some steel. Oh my god, so satisfying. Just going to mark him there. Because my ruler is exactly 30mm wide. So most things I make have 30mm flanges because it's easy to just use side of my ruler. Draw around the template. Get a centre punch. Wipe crap off centre punch. Piece box section across. And ensure I get the height right. That's all I'm interested in at the minute. Because I'm going to draw around this famous Ferrari tube to get the curve. That was a bit easier, wasn't it? There you go. Yeah, it's pretty good. It's pretty good. That looks like it'll fit a trait. Just go find a centre mark, tack it on. We will tack it on and check it. And again. That is attached. Now I'll go there, have a little step off the back, rubber dog it. That's the bottom mount done for that. Get it from underneath, shall I?